Welcome to this overview of the Cold Conquest 1908 start map that I have created for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. It will be available in the Steam Workshop in late June 2024. Now, this video will consist of 3 sections. I will be doing a fairly brief introduction, but what I will say is that if you are interested in this map, I strongly recommend that you at least listen to the first 3 or 4 minutes, because there's some very important points that you do need to be aware of if you want to play this map. The main bulk of the video will be going around talking about the features, trying to explain why they've been placed in the way they are. And then at the final section will be, we could call a small spoiler section. I'll give you plenty of warning when it's actually due to arrive, where I'm going to talk about some of the things you may need to consider if you've never played an early 1908 start, and some of the things that maybe help you get started in the game. That out of the way, we might just get straight into the introduction. And the first thing I need to say, and I need to make this very clear, that this map is set up for people who've got the biomes DLC. The reason for that is that the map is actually a Siberian map, and you can tell that by the fact that we're starting on the 10th of May 1908. Well, not the year, but the actual month, because if you were starting on the normal map, you'd be starting around the 2nd or 3rd of March. What I will say is that I have another version of this map which I will be putting up on the workshop, which can be played in the base game. But and to give a reason for that is that if any of you follow the channel for some time, you'll be aware that one of my big ambitions is to do a full length gameplay starting in the, well, originally it was the 1900s, playing all the way through to about the 2000s, and really grow a big economy with a big historical context. That has always been my objective for when the game went into full release. So I worked on a map to do that, which is what this map is actually based on. And then I got shot in the foot, because as part of the full release process, which was on the 20th of June 2024, the developers announced the biomes DLC. And I have to admit, at first I was a bit skeptical, because I put so much work into the other version of this map. But then once I looked at the Siberian kind of conditions, and if anyone's not sure what the Siberian conditions are, one is that the season is a lot shorter. It now, instead of running from March to the end of November, it now runs from May to the end of September. Grazing crops is going to be a bit of a challenge. I think I've got a solution for it, but I've got no idea where it's going to work. And the other thing is the fact that on the Siberian map, the winter temperatures are incredibly cold. So being able to keep your population warm so they don't get upset on hard mode is going to be very, very tricky. And that's the challenge that really drew to me. So what I did was I just spent a very intense period of time translating the original map into a Siberian map. Unfortunately, I couldn't port like for like. So when I published the other map, if you take a look at it, there are some significant differences. But I couldn't avoid it, because the way that the terrain editor goes is that you have to select the biome before you can actually start on the map, which means you can't actually import the map back in as a save game as such. So that was a little bit unfortunate. Before I talk about why the map was created and the idea behind it, I just want to mention one other thing. That is that I will not be revealing the location of any of the resources in this video for two reasons. One, I'm on realistic mode, so I can't show it to you anyway, because it's locked behind research. And the other reason is that I don't actually know where the resources are beyond a very specific rule, in the sense that, as similar to my unification map, the only resources inside of the 2 Soviet areas you can see on the map here is coal and iron. All the other oil, uranium and bauxite is in this area here. But of course there's also coal and iron inside this area. And the reason I don't know is simply down to the fact, because of the very short turnaround time, I got my wife to edit the default resources on the map, following a few guidelines that I gave her. If any of you guys play this map and feel that the resources are in very odd places, apologies, but My wife is a graphics designer, not a game player, and she's certainly never played Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. What I had to do was show her some samples of maps and where resources play, and then just gave her that guideline that they could only be coal and iron inside of the Soviet areas, and she could put anything else anywhere else. So apologies if there's a little bit of an issue with respect to the resources on this map. The other thing also is that normally when I create a map, I spend about 40 odd plus hours kind of doing test gameplay. Unfortunately, I've done very little test gameplay on here, so there might be a few oddities that may come up, and if you do encounter it on a map, please feel free to put it onto the comments in the Steam Workshop, and I'll see if I can do something about it. So what I want to do now is just move on to what the theme of this map is, because as I say, its start is in 1908. Decided not to go back to 1900 because of the problem with the fact that you only have horses and carts, and I wanted a bit more flexibility. It's also a populated map. The population up the top I put here to give you an idea of what you will get in the way of population if you just take the default settings in the game. Of course, I won't be starting with any population because they would be all left by the time I've even got the basics in place. And the theme is, similar to my unification map, is that you've got two Soviet republics which are separated by distance. In between, you've got, well, call it a NATO republic, but really it's a non-Soviet republic. And the idea is to expand across these border crossings, which restrict your access, and effectively take over this very rich land in between over a period of time. For the purposes of my game, and you can consider it yourself, is that the Soviet Revolution takes place in 1917. So before 1917, the only reason you can cross the border is to go to here to buy some NATO vehicles. But you can't, so the rule is that you can't expand into this area until you 1917. But the second part of the challenge is that rather than start in one populated town and spread over, and you can thank the developer of the campaign missions in Workers and Resources Soviet Republic, what I want to do is actually start with at least 3, possibly all 5 of the villages. So what I'm going to do now is just go through what we got here is a small village here. It's got access to a border post here, which is the customs office. Now there is a NATO shed on the other side, but you see that there is no shortcut round this. So technically this is not available until you actually find one of the secret ways to get across the border. Now I'm not going to tell you where those secret ways are in this part. If you want to know that, you can either look for them yourself or actually go to the spoiler section of the video. So what you've got is this small village here. Now I'm just going to talk about this village in the sense that I've deliberately laid these out from the perspective of playing realistic mode. So you'll notice in these villages they've all got like a common here, which is really in here from the point of view of being able to put a shop in the center. What I will say is that if you do put I'm just going to pick up a shopping mall just as an example, what you'll see is that you will get a reasonable level of coverage from a shop in this area here, and that's a feature of all the towns. The other thing you also see is these farms here. So you've got this village here. Now if I come over to here, this is really the main town for starting, or this is where I'm going to be starting. It's very close to this border crossing here. Now this is what you could call the official crossing place, and what you've got here is a medium Soviet customs post and a medium NATO borders crossing, and more importantly you've got a rail link here which then goes and a road link which you can get through legally, because you can see the border doesn't actually reach there. And of course the border is demarcated by these this map here, and there's some fences. And then just for the funs of it, I've put in this small village down here with some fields as well. And then the other key feature here is there is a what's it called? I can't remember what it's called now. Wood-based rail track which runs all the way through here. I'll just scoot over it very, very quickly. Now you'll see that there are gaps in it. So it's a damaged railway. So in order to be able to use it, you've got to repair it. But it will come to this border post here. And what you've got is a large customs shed here. The reason that this is here is the fact that the game puts limits on trains that you may want to use based on the size of the customs shed. And so from a late game perspective, I've put this in to be able to make all options of trains and vehicles available. So there will be a justification for actually repairing this line and upgrading it. And you can see it's a single track line with passing places. That is the called the southern Soviet area. And now the northern area, there's another 2 villages. So you can say there's 5 altogether. There's no villages or buildings placed within the kind of central area. It's completely open for development. The concept is that this area is a remote area near the Arctic Circle. Call it Siberia for reasons. And this area has been completely neglected by the owners. What you've got here is an inclusion from the kind of the bottom right hand corner of a Soviet republic, and then up here in this area you've got an island which the Soviet Republic has actually settled with these 2 settlements here. So these have got no kind of bridge connections to the border. What you've got, if any of you played my can't remember what the map was called, would be familiar with this setup, in the sense that we've got a medium customs shed here which allows you to make rail connections, and I put a little bit of a port in here just as a hint. The port here is for 2 reasons. One is it's a hint that to get goods and resources in here you're going to need to use shipping. I've actually given a dock simply because I think that's only fair, considering that we're starting in 1908, and what we got is this small kind of village here. Originally it wasn't meant to be here. In fact, the fact is that I was really taken by this little mound for the cathedral, so I thought I'd build off from that, which is kind of going to make it a little bit harder to place all the key buildings and essentials into this area. And then this was where the original village was going to be. And what I've done is I put another port in here. Now you can see both these ports have warehouses. There's a little bit of a scar there where I was doing some play testing with respect to putting an open hole. So I've given a warehouse on these here. It's a bit modern for the map, but it's the best I could do because I didn't want to use mods on the map. And that's worth mentioning. There are no mods on this map. All the buildings and features you see are part of the base game. And the other interesting fact, which I haven't mentioned, is that these small buildings are all from the Siberian biome. So these are actually Siberian buildings, where these ones are from the base game terrain editor. The reason I put this port in is you can see that this is detached from here. And of course, if you're starting in 1908, this distance, which was not is still a fair distance when you are starting in 1960. So the idea is that you will be being able to supply this village, which, because of course, as part of the objectives of the game, is to have all these villages up and running by 1917. So that's the main sub goal. So if you want to look at it from another perspective, the time period from 1908 to 1917 is a prequel for the actual game itself. You can be you're actually building up the economy, getting it working, because one of the things I found when I did an early start, before starting in one village, you take such a long time to build things up that building the accommodation, getting things set up, you're in the 1920s, 1930s, and you've just got one village. The objective of this series is to have a more stronger working economy. And that's the reason why, even though this is realistic mode, the start money I'm going to be using, or I'd recommend, is 4.7 million. The reason is that if you're going to build up 5 independent villages, there's also going to be the challenge of managing them independently. Now, another feature I will show in the villages, I have added some gravel roads and footpaths in, just to show what you could call the upmarket end of town. The rest are all mud roads. You can see it's quite an interesting feature that on a Siberian map, the mud roads are actually white rather than that yucky brown. And the other reason why I've put all this in as mud roads and mud footpaths is the fact that I didn't want to restrict somebody in realistic mode by having to demolish all this before they could put their own buildings in. So what I've done is I put the gravel footpaths and roads around the areas which I suspect that you won't want to change. But if you want to change, feel free. You'd even knock the churches down if you want. So that's the main buildings. What I'm going to do now is just talk a little bit about the NATO connections. There's a NATO connection down here, like here, and actually another sub goal that I did think about, and it was going to be the theme of the map, was to connect the bottom right hand corner with the island by rail, and also put a spur down to this NATO post here. So you've got a NATO post here. There's another one, I think, God, I can't even remember. There's a small one here, medium one here, and then if I come across to just about here, what you'll see is I've actually put in a double rail bridge and a road bridge here. The reason for that is that this is, you can see the border is here, and you can't build across it. So to be fair, if you want to connect the two together, you've got an option here. The alternative is that I've left a gap here for anyone who wants to build massive road bridges across here to connect it up in their own way here. So that's that there. So what we'll do is look at some more of the features. I've already kind of highlighted the border here. The other thing I will draw your attention to is that the borders, when they're drawn close together like this, the map gets a bit confusing. It gives the impression that this is a NATO border with a little bit of the Russian border. But if you actually draw the map out very big, what you'll see is this here is meant to be a bit of Soviet, a bit of NATO. That means that if you build a port down here, you can export to both the Soviet Republic and NATO, because the fact is that because the border comes in here, and then what you've also got down here is a second border, but this is the border that counts. So even though that gives the impression that you can't export to the Soviet countries, you can, because when the route's being calculated, it's actually this border that counts. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. One little secret way round, which I will kind of give away, is because I want to go up into the mountains here, is if you pick up this path here, you'll see that it will wander up through the mountains, and it actually crosses down over here and comes through the mountains here. So this is what you could call a smuggler's route, which comes down to another crossing point here. This is a medium customs shed. Again, it's NATO. So this kind of gives an opportunity, but I did consider putting the track in, but what I did was put in the road and put this super long bridge in. So if you really want to bring in NATO from this side, personally, I wouldn't do it. But so just to finish off this section, I'll just give you a route around this river. Now, what you need to be aware of is that this river is not navigable, because if I follow it down, you'll see we will get to points here where the river disappears. Now, the reason this river looks like it is, it's what you would call a flood river, in the sense that when the Arctic winter and the snow melts, this becomes a river. But as the summer comes, the river starts to kind of turn more into a bog than actual a flowing river. So if I show you on the mini map, you see that the river itself barely shows up at all. And in a similar vein, what I put in is, I can't remember the proper name for these lakes. These are lakes which form up in the Arctic. I think it's more in the tundra. And what they are is that they're depressions in the ground that when the snow melts, the water runs into these depressions and forms lakes for the summer. But because the permafrost is underneath, the water can't drain away because the ground below is frozen. So you get these small lakes here. And these were more an accidental creation, but I think they're quite cool. And I say, just to wind up, this river is navigable as far as here. This river, I have play tested to get a boat up here. But what I will say, guys, is that if you want to do it, be aware that the navigation through here can be interesting, is the polite way, but you can actually do it. The only problem is you're going to be very careful. You can only really use small docks. If I show you here, because we'll just use small cargo, yeah, you're going to have to choose your locations very carefully because of the overhang. So you won't be able to build docks everywhere. Anyway, guys, this is where I'm going to end this overview section. And what I'm going to do now is go into the spoiler section. So if you don't want the spoilers, feel free to leave now. And if any of you stayed for the spoilers, welcome. The first thing I'm going to do is come down to here. Now, a lot of these spoilers actually relate to the vehicles and the 1908 start specifically. So the first thing I want to show you here, for anyone who's not familiar, in fact, there's a curiosity here. Now you see here, you've got some very modern vehicles here, but these are actually used vehicles. This seems to be a quirk of the fact that when you create a map, then you have to retrograde the date back. Because the game is already created, it's already created a selection of used vehicles. Now, I'm not sure what will happen once the game rolls forward. I haven't been able to test that. But what I'm going to show you here is the type of vehicles that, if you're going to start in 1908, I'm not going to go through them all. You can see they're mainly down to steam engines and horse-drawn cars. I think there's only a very, very few personal cars. If I do that and then we search by speed, you've got a Model E steam car and a Stanley steamer. So the vehicle availability in 1908 is I wouldn't say very restricted, but one thing you do need to be aware of is the fact that the road speed is very low. So truthfully, you don't really need to go much above gravel for the first, well, before 1917. Now, if I flip over to here, if I come to this one here, you can actually get some quite interesting vehicles, but they are random. But we've actually got an ore tanker. I think the last time I did this, I got a water truck. But in here, you only get 4 pages of NATO trucks. But this is where having this access here will make a big difference to your game. And this is the reason why this is going to be a starter town. Because what you get access to is some actually faster moving trucks, which can help you get this starter town up and running using NATO trucks, which is perfectly valid because even up into the Soviet Revolution, ties with the West weren't completely broken. Now I'm going to give you the reason why this rail line is actually broken, and the reason for that is down to the fact that you're going to need to put in. I'm just going to use the base game one. Is you're going to need to put a fuel station in here, be able to run your diesel trains. But of course in 1908 you can also run coal trains, and there is a mod that will allow you to put coal on the train rather than just leaving a gap which looked a bit artificial. That's why I introduced the concept of the track being broken, because one of the problems with realistic mode is actually trying to demolish the track, which is a little bit of a pain in the neck. So I thought I'd just put this in, leave this gap here so you can put your fueling station in, because of course you're not going to electrify it. Now this big green area is literally meant as a hint towards putting your rail construction in here, or if you want anything like that. Now the other tip that I'm going to show you, if I can remember where they are, is that if I go across here, they're kind of hidden in the trees, is the fact that there are tunnels underneath. There's one here which will allow you to backdoor across the border there. And then there is another one up here close to this village. There it is, just here. And they're kind of hidden in the trees. Now, another reason why there's so many trees on the map is to break up the sheer effect of the white. So there are 2 secret ways across the border, and they're tunnels to avoid, because they're smugglers' routes. So that is the other thing. And if I come up to here, I'm going to explain why this actually has a medium dock rather than a small dock. And the reason is, if I come to purchase ships, I think and of course there are no ships early this time. fact, if I go back to, I'm not even sure that there are any ships. So there's no actual Soviet ships available in 1908. But if I put the workshop on for here, see there are a number of ships here. Now, the reason I'm using a medium dock is that the workhorses for the workhorses that you're probably going to want to use early in the game are this motor schooner here, and more importantly, these flying P liners. And one of the downside is that these cannot be purchased in a small dock. You've got to have a medium dock to be able to purchase them because of their length. So that's the reason why this has actually got a medium dock on it, because the P liners were windjammers which were around in 1908. So I felt it'd be quite good fun, and from the immersion perspective, to be able to use them. That is the key spoilers. What I will do just to wind this section off is go back to what I'll be using as the starter town, and then what I'll be doing is working on this town and the one we just visited with the dock. And of course, one of the key things we're going to need to use, because I'm going to be in realistic mode, is we're going to need to have the 3 gas stations, which kind of gives a bit of a complication because you've got wagons which have horse feeders in. There's also coaling stations for the steaming trucks. So that's a bit of a complication. Now, the other thing I would suggest is that if you're starting out, is you may have to put a modern plumbing system in, and certainly in this area here, simply because the trucks won't be able to empty the sewage and deliver the water fast enough. So that's something, and to be honest, I'm not too sure how that goes. And the final kind of spoiler I will give you, and I will recommend a mod for this if I can find it, is we come to power plants. Here, the mod you're looking for is a Czech hydroelectric late 19th century Pisek. Now, this is going to be the key to the power, because of course everything has power. I didn't really test this. I may have to do some leveling here. Oh no, it flashed green. So what you're going to need is this power plant here to be able to ride this. Now, this power plant will produce 180 megawatts. So it's possible that you could supply the energy to all this town, and the village from this single power plant, and that also applies to the 2 villages at the top. So you may have to run some quite long power lines across the map. So from an energy point of view, you're going to use the water wheels. In previous starts, I've actually used the wind turbines, but unfortunately now the wind turbines are locked behind tech, so you can't use them from the get-go. The only other alternative from the point of view of power is to use something like this. This is actually a little bit of a stretch from a 1908 perspective, but it may actually work. But this is actually a local generator, which needs you need to bring in diesel. The downside of this is the slow delivery speeds. That's why I'm suggesting the fact that you build this, and so that you've got something that's a bit more consistent. I think I better stop here now, because I'm starting to get into the depths of the game mechanics, which is not somewhere I particularly want to go. The only other thing that I will say, and this is a very broad tip, I won't show you the locations, but near every one of these sites is a small deposit of gravel. It could be slightly hidden, and the reason for that is that you can put a small quarry on here. I'm not sure if you could put a big quarry on. I wouldn't be that inclined to do it. You could put a big quarry on here actually, and maybe that might be an option. I hadn't considered it. Every one of the villages has a small quarry nearby. There's 2 reasons for doing that. One, it's an opportunity to get your own construction industry up and running. The other reason is that if I come back to mods, apologies, if I go to water treatment, and what you see here is a water filtration plant that uses gravel instead of chemicals. And so what I would suggest is that if you want to provide your own water purification, is that you actually use this and then set up some gravel production, be able to supply your own gravel, because it's not so much about saving money, it's more about dealing with the slow movement of trucks around to keep your economy going. Anyway, this is where I'm going to leave it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it interesting. And until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.